Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Design with Renn. Today, I'm thrilled to be in conversation with Kem Laurin-Lubin, a thinker, writer, and design leader whose work challenges us to rethink care, responsibility, and equity when designing emerging technologies. In this episode, we're diving into how to translate human-centered design theory into practice using personas, journey maps, and design principles. So research insights can guide teams and create experiences that truly connect with people. Thanks so much for joining me, Kem.
As usual, a pleasure, Renn. Thanks for having me.
Of course. To start, can you share how you use empathy tools in your work, such as personas, journey maps, and design? And how do these help individuals, teams translate research into actionable design decisions?
Indeed. So the whole notion of personas and journey maps really have the legacy in ethnographic studies, right? And so to be able to create solutions for people, you have to really understand, of course, who they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
As well as the context in which they and in the case when we talk about software design, the context in which they are using your software, but also as well too the context in which they exist while they're using your software. So
Mm-hmm.
these are a couple of things too, and so part of this as well too in the process of using their software, your software or a software, there is a specific journey that they actually go through to do that. So let's talk about personas first. So personas themselves are really very important in the design practice because in many ways they represent a prototypical essence. I don't want to say a person because it's not really a person. It is really a summation of persons or groups of people
Mm-hmm.
that really are the core target of a design offering, whether it's a service or a product. It doesn't really matter what that is. And when you have an understanding of that essence of people, and their psychographic makeup and everything about them, you're better able to design something that would respond to specifically what they're looking for, as well as meet their specific context and needs. So, in the design practice, that is how we actually think about personas. Now, when we talk about personas as well, we have dominant personas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't want to say a persona. Personas on the fringe of the thing that we're designing for. And it behooves us as well to consider what that is, because these are places that while we're selling a product or a service to a target, we often think about the biggest group, right? How much more of that product can we sell? And so the dominant personas become the target space. But in much the same way, we cannot neglect the emergent persona, the fringe persona, because they too could have varying modifications of the things you're designing that speaks to them specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other artifact, I don't know if you mentioned this, but stakeholder maps as well too, right?
Yeah. Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Go back to, so you talked about like the dominant and fringe personas. So thanks for that language. Actually, it's different than which is why I love to chatting with you, is that different language than what I typically use, which is, hey, wonderful. I would typically say like a primary and secondary, but
Yes.
saying like dominant versus fringe also gives us different language and really implies some different meaning.
Yes. Yes.
When
Absolutely.
that makes sense. So curious from your point of view, are there moments in a project where sorry about that.
Yeah.
Are there moments in a project where tools such as personas are particularly, or they become really powerful?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I think of my time working at, and that's my dog. Yes. So sorry about that. But I think of my time working at Siemens, where it was the first time I saw a very unique.
Yeah, that's not a persona, that's a real dog.
That's okay. Yeah. We had the front door open and the mailman just walked by.
Mm.
Yeah. Dog don't like mailman.
Dog needs to
Yeah.
tell the mailman who's the boss.
I know. He does this, and it's the same mailman. You think he'd be over it by now. Yeah. Okay. So let me just get back to where I was. So
So
you
yeah,
were asking about time.
yeah. So I really like how you've described the idea of personas being a dominant or a fringe persona.
Hmm.
Are there moments in a projects that these tools become especially powerful?
Absolutely. So I'll talk about one very fun example I had of the whole idea of persona. So I worked at Siemens, as you probably already know, in Germany and the US. And Siemens was really ahead of its time in having every employee understand its customers. So it was not unusual back in the day to go to Siemens Medical, the office in Pennsylvania, or Siemens Healthcare Systems, to see a hallway of faces. And you think like, who are these people? Who's Maria, the traveling nurse? Who are these people? And what they had done was really to bring to life their personas and have them integrated into the space. So when designers were working, we could say we're designing for Maria, but the wonderful thing about the way they used personas was that they were not static images in time, right? So we could say things like, in 2001, we added this feature because Maria needed to do these things to be able to, execute on these tasks. And now 5 years later, we've already done that for Maria. Why don't we give Maria these as the tools, right? And so, in framing personas as live people that existed in our workspace, we were not only able to design for a persona like Maria in the moment, but really having this idea because we knew that Maria was married. She had a daughter. Maria also, was a healthcare nurse who had her aging mom living with them. They all had backstories. So we could figure out, okay, is there a way that we can actually make Maria's life better in how we design? So in that case, we use as part of the design process to not only onboard the new designers coming into the space, but to bring to life these personas so that we had them in at the forefront of our mind because we're all assigned to various product strings, right? So whether you worked on audiology or you worked for the healthcare informatics team, we all had an idea of who all the personas were who used our tool. And within that itself, we had dominant personas like Maria using a specific tool, although there were fringe personas who might use it on X occasions. So that for me was one wonderful memory of using personas in a design space where it was almost like a tangible, visceral experience of the whole persona
Yeah,
as a tool in design.
super interesting in how you described it for me was that when and the context in which you were working then would have been in a physical space with the
Yes,
design
yes,
online. So as you were talking about that, when you went to the space that there were the pictures on the wall. So it's like sort of consistently, I mean, I don't know how often each day, but seeing as an example Maria. So it's like Maria was a persona, not a person, but it felt the way that you described it that it was very much part of, this person, her was she was part of the discussion or kind of within the space that you were creating. And I think different than how I've thought about personas before, how I've seen them used is that we know in this case that Maria has a daughter, but the way that you talked about it sort of implied that, working with a team over time, that it, even though Maria is a persona, her life also changes. So according to her life stage, she and her daughter get older, so she may need different things. So
yes,
kind of if a team is actively using the personas and talking about what might happen next, then that conversation of, who she is, what she does, wants and needs, her pain points, and so on, can dynamically change real time.
yeah. As you were saying that, Ren, I was thinking of the one use case I remember working on was she needed to pick up her daughter
Mm-hmm.
at school, and it was in the opposite direction where she needed to see a patient. She was a traveling nurse. And one of the solutions that we ended up building was a quick way for Maria to inform head office that she was unable to, and that was really back in the day when we didn't have, you know, location-based services and the ability to know where Maria versus the other traveling nurses are. And so one of the features we're able to build in was for Maria to transfer a patient, right? So the other traveling nurses in that, in this case, it was New Jersey, in that New Jersey space. And so somebody could actually take on Maria's patient because this is on their way to some other patient, right? And so the backstory that we created as the trigger for that is that Maria suddenly had to pick up a daughter or suddenly had to do something. Because really, when we think about traveling nurses in that context back in the day in the US, a lot of them were single moms who had the responsibility of young children at home as well as adults. So I really appreciated the level to which Siemens went through to really understand the backstory. And the way we did this was that we traveled with lots of Marias, right? So as designers, when ethnography was a big part of what we did, we spent a
Hmm.
lot of time on the road, traveling with traveling nurses and realizing, hmm, there is a common thread here. All of these women are single moms. All of these women still have, well, whatever, not that they were all single, but we saw a pattern emerging. All of these women come from multi-generational households and they're still paying their loans. The economy breakdown. And we heard their stories and we really tried to build to some of the possible limitations of their context.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Sort of in addition to what you're sharing regarding to how you're using personas, you're also talking about different ways of testing, gathering feedback, how to do research. So it's that
Yeah.
using the persona, but also interviewing nurses that are
Yes.
represent, or, like the persona of Maria represents those nurses that you're interviewing, but you're interviewing, you're immersing yourself in their world, and you're also observing. So it's
Yes.
like
Yes.
three different methods, interviewing, observing, immersing yourself in their world, and three different ways of doing research or testing that is very rich from the point of view of being able to capture experiences.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And you talk about the journey map as well too. So part and parcel of that whole experience that you're capturing journeys, right? You're also capturing, in the back, the rich backstory of Maria, as appended to the software that I was working on at the time. And
Hmm.
there was a community of people, stakeholders. There was Maria's mom or Maria's elderly parent. There was other friends of hers, other traveling nurses, and that really enables a richer solutioning, right? And so these are all the things I think that have somehow gone past, by the wayside when designers don't have the opportunity to leave the office. One of my favorite bosses used to tell us when he came to the office at Siemens and he would see staff, and there were like 20 of us, he would
Hmm.
say, nothing important happens in the office. He had a kind of a short, nothing important is Nigo. Nothing important happens in the office. Anyway, we just walk in and say that and just walk back out. So it was not unusual to have designers go straight to the hospital for work or go straight to some other beta site for work and then come in at like 11 or 12. So there was a lot of that going on. And I think that is what we've missed in really the new generation of design, where designers don't have access to the people they're designing for, but they have the data of the people they're designing it for, which is not the same thing, right?
Hmm. So interesting in that he would provide that as a prompt to people, and
Get out of the office.
as time's passed, of course, we've in many cases people are 100% working remotely, isolated and alone. Though they're collaborating, they're maybe collaborating online is of course different than collaborating in person for obvious reasons. But what
Yeah.
I find truly interesting in what you just talked about was that with this many designers teams being called back to work full time in an office versus remote or hybrid, that yes, bring people back together, but for what is it? I think a good question in context of what you're talking about. It's like, yes, interesting things can happen in the office, but where are the people that you're designing for? What are they doing? In what context? Where do we have that opportunity? When or how do we have that opportunity to actually observe, immerse, interview them in their real life context? These days
Yeah.
is very rare. And yes, we have access to their data. That's is of course out of context because it's data that's been captured. We can simulate, but I'm so curious. How do you decide? So how do you decide? Maybe this is not a fair question because now I'm limiting it. I don't want to limit it to one, but how do you decide which tool to use for different research insights?
Yeah. That is a very, so I think a lot of the work that we've done, Ren, we've often been constrained by budgets, right? And so we, we, what's the word I want to use here? We subjugate ourselves to the budget. We cannot do this because of the budget. And so a lot of times, as designers, I remember when we had massive budgets, $1 million budgets, and then it became very dwindly to like, we have no budget. So we started thinking about, well, we could do a heuristic evaluation. We started providing, you know, plug the hole solutions that are best left sometimes unplugged, just let it break. And so I think we need to figure out a way that we get back to people's context. There's been a massive loss, I think, generationally in the design space where we are disconnected from the people for whom we design solutions. And we've moved into sort of ivory tower situation. So the tools that we use really should be less guided by the budgets and more by realism, by context, right? So I'll give you one example. I
Hmm.
was recently, let me not date it exactly, so I, target the company, but I worked on a project once where the company was talking about, well, we want people to bank with us, but we're not traditionally known as a bank. How do we actually flip that? And so a lot of the work that we did was really trying to understand the essence of what it is when people say, I'm going to my bank, right? And
Hmm.
what surfaced out of that was the idea that people had a mental model of what it means to be a bank and where they kept their money. And there was a need to have a physical space to go and see, even though they didn't go to the bank all the time, they needed to know this is my RBC bank, that's where my money is. And so there was a lot of work done in that. And so I said, well, is there a way that we can actually talk to people? And they said, well, what we could do is just send you the data that we have from the call center or whatever. And while that is good data, there is something to be said for actually sitting with the potential customers of that potential bank they're trying to design, as opposed to looking at the data from just the call center. Now, it is a proxy good piece of data because we get to hear people's issues with the current structure. But a
Hmm.
lot of times we get sent Excel spreadsheets, we
Mm.
get sent just data. We don't know what to do with it. So, yeah, I think I will rest it at that. We need to figure out, have we figure out as designers proximity to user and the user's context. And in
Hmm.
many opportunities, we do not have that because we're unable to have the budget to go do that. So the
Hmm.
proxy in that case is, call center data. So really, for me, the guidepost is how close is that data to the real and true context, the people for whom we're designing.
Yeah. So in my work and the work that you do, we focus on taking what can be very complex research and
Yeah.
data and turn it into design guidance that teams can actually use. There can be,
Mhm.
recommendations, best practices, it can be roadmaps,
Yes.
you know, short-term, long-term
Yeah.
suggestion. And so we, it's this, and this has been whether we're shaping enterprise software, wearable tech, or really even, inclusive community experiences. Right? I mean, we've collaborated on many community, based workshop facilitated
Yeah.
events. And so, from your perspective, how do you go from the research and data into something that's tangible, like a persona or a journey map that then sort of aggregates and presents this data feedback
Yeah.
outcomes? Let me rephrase that question. From your perspective, Kim, how do you go from research to something tangible like a persona or a journey map that allows you to
Mhm.
and align the team or a team?
Yes, yes. That's a really good question, Ren. And you put me on the spot. I feel like something a student here. But yeah, I think part of it.
We're making it too easy for you.
So, with the whole idea of personas, I always say that a lot of this, we have containers for what we need to fill in the container of what constitutes a persona, right? And
Hmm.
we're told that, okay, you've done this great research. We need to synthesize it into an actionable artifact, i.e. a persona. And some of the things that are contained on, say, a persona, container, if you want to say that, so we could act on it. Things like the person's context, their motives. And we've gone further to say, okay, well, we have a persona. Let's give the persona a name. of course, I always caution a little bit around the name because we like Maria, right? I think of Maria, and sometimes I forget that there were other Marias that inform that Maria persona, right? And so, how do we actually go from that process? It's really synthesizing the patterns that we see from this chaotic mess, right? And say, okay, we see patterns of activities that these people that we're trying to design for do. And we
Hmm.
see common motives that these people do. So it is really what is happening in that process, that synthesis, sorry, is extraction of big patterns that
Hmm.
tell us that we see these things, we need to react to these things. So motives, we see that in the case of all the Marias, they're single moms, they have to get home, so time is an issue, right? So these things become distilled and
Hmm.
housed in the persona bucket. So we will need motives, we'll need context, we'll need a lot of things. But one of the dangers of personas as we have known it today is that it's a bucket that we fill in. They have templates for it, right? We fill in the template. And I think
Hmm.
there's a lot lost in that as well, too, because there's a lot that is unseen because we're only reflecting these five little buckets of information that we need to act on.
Hmm.
Yes. So for me, so in short, tracking patterns,
Hmm.
and situating it, synthesizing it in a persona bucket slash template, and saying now we can work. And I don't know necessarily that that is with all the years that I've been practicing, that is necessarily the truth anymore because the world has changed so much, right? A lot of the
Hmm.
things that the personas as a collective do is also reinformed by the technology itself, right? There's this constant re-informing of people by technology. So is that the real thing, right? So
Hmm. I really
yeah.
like where you're going with this and things that you've talked about relevant to the, how and when you've used personas and how it's been effective or not. Where,
Yeah.
typical use of personas that I've seen is that they can remain very static over time.
Mm,
It, sort of assumes that that person is it's just a statement in a document, or they're, documented per that moment in time. But what I really kind of reflecting on as you're talking through how you've used those is that and amazing that you've got some examples where you've had teams, colleagues, peers that you've worked with over time that
mhm.
then kind of like took that persona and allowed it to be kind of more dynamic and
Yes.
thought about the context, and then kind of real time talked about where is now, as your example, Maria in her life stage, and then how do we react to that as a designer researcher. So how do you make sure, or how can you, a
Yes.
persona, a journey map, that they not only represent research but also drive empathy and meaningful experiences?
How would I discuss? So the question is specifically around how these personas inform the research as well as enable empathy, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you for rephrasing the
Absolutely.
question. What I was thinking about is that like talked about how a persona is it's a document or a representation of a. Sorry, I got my cuckoo clock.
Well,
12 o'clock.
I love that. Love that.
It's so funny. It reminds me of my grandmother. She had a cuckoo clock.
I was gonna say the same thing.
Did you?
Yes. I
Wow.
didn't want to say it because I didn't want to get off track, but I grew up with this tall clock. It was as tall as me at the time. And this
Yeah.
little clock would come out cuckoo and go back in. Yeah, so that was one.
That's so funny. I would not that I mean I only had a few times where I would like stay for like a longer period of time was and when I was a kid because she lived on a farm. And so when I would hear the clock, me and my brothers, we would like the clock was in the living room. And so then we would like
Yes,
run into the living room so then we could actually see the bird come out.
yes,
Like, oh, I'm gonna get it. Try to get
yes.
it.
I had the same experience. That is so cool. Oh my
So
gosh. You gotta leave that in. You gotta leave that in. I love that. Oh my gosh. Anyway, it triggered a beautiful memory for me as well, too.
yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
pod o'clock. Podcast o'clock.
Yes. Yeah. No
So yeah,
question. I
using
remember.
So the personas, they allow us, or a persona in a journey map represents the research or the outcomes. I wonder how might we also use these to drive empathy and help, initiate those that we're creating requirements for, or, really want to create an even better experience for the people that we're designing for. Are there things that we can change in how we think about them, or how we use them, or how we represent them, that really helps us drive that, how we look at how to design for people, and how we want people to
Yeah.
be more empathetic, putting themselves in the shoes of the user, which we know is always very hard for people to do. It's like, yes, we put ourselves in the shoes of the users. Like, well, if you're not, only if you're the person, people, we believe, you tell me if I'm wrong with this, but it can be very hard to translate that, the feeling that we have after interviewing, observing, immersing ourselves with those that we're designing for, to those that then we want to action on our recommendations.
Hmm. That is such an amazing framing. So, of course, I will invoke Maria again just to keep the continuation going. And to me, when we think about personas as well, to Ren, I think how that should inform research is that personas are also representational of a moment in a time span, right? And so with Maria, she might have started out with a little baby, and now her baby's now 11 years old. So the
Mm-hmm.
Maria that we're designing for when she had a little baby is not the Maria that we're designing for. So, one, in terms of informing the cycle of research, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the thing we've captured is static, and
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be continuation to reinform the design practices of the designers designing for the Marias of the world in the example that I gave earlier. So that's one thing. So I know we take these personas and we present them to, the engineers, and we present them and we give them value when we do that. But by the same token, we also need to consider that the way we present them, we need to frame that these are just pictures, like a photograph that you take of
Mm-hmm.
somebody, and that person may have changed and grown from there. So one, yes, it needs to be an artifact that is informing of a cycle of research that is not just stuck in time.
Mm-hmm.
The other part as well too that we were just talking about is the empathy side, right? So I can have deep empathy for Maria with her baby and all of that. I don't know what her conditions and her circumstances and the context is, say, 7 years later, when I'm still
Mm-hmm.
designing for that, right? And so the empathy that I have has to be something that has a certain degree of stickiness to it, that it's not something that is the empathy I felt for her 7 years ago, but hand in hand with the cycle of research to be able to keep that empathy alive. And I know it is very hard because we get in our frame of our practice of designing, and nobody's thinking of Marie on a daily basis, right? But
Mm-hmm.
just the recognition and keeping alive the non-static nature of the existence of personas as an artifact, I think
Mm-hmm.
is something we need to do to keep that empathy alive as well too as design practitioners, right? And we need
Yes.
to also advocate, we talked about this earlier too, like data. For us, we have gone from a state where we're no longer talking with the person, but the person's data, right? There needs to be even great amounts of empathy superimposed on that data to realize that there is a human being behind the data collective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is the context and the impact
Yeah.
of the design on them?
Yeah, well, that's a great, really great reflection. What's standing out to me is that the example that you're sharing is it's like 7 years ago. So Maria has really stayed in your mind as a very impactful
Yeah,
persona, and Maria represented that clinician, nurse, if I've got it right.
yeah. She was Maria Lopez was our traveling nurse.
She was a traveling nurse. So Maria's a traveling nurse. You mentioned upon kind of, interviewing, observing, immersing yourself with then the, sort of participants or people that the persona represented, that
Mhm.
have discovered that people such as Maria were, their mom might maybe a single mom. They may be someone that is living in a multi-generational home.
Yeah,
They may not be making a lot of money based on the pay that these traveling nurses
yeah,
receive, which sadly over time has not changed. I think the
yeah.
you're describing for me for Maria still exists. So though she that as a and we can imagine where Maria may be right now based on her
Yeah.
life and so on. The design principles, characteristics that you apply to guide solutions. How would you say that this, I mean, it's time has passed, but how did this persona, the journey map, influence what at that moment in time was the final design or designs that you were initiating to
Hmm.
move forward?
Okay, so let me see if I understand. So how did that what is it, the extraction of these insights from the persona inform the design?
Yeah, yeah. Let me frame this a little bit more specific. So, the persona itself, how can that, or how did that, if you want to pull from that the specific example, how did it influence the design recommendations or the design wanted to push forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to our boss, nothing happens in the office. One of the things we would do, and my friend April McGee, who's now retired somewhere in Panama,
Hmm.
she was one of these people who spared the whole idea of traveling with the nurses on a regular. What we were able to ascertain, because that was a different time than now, we were
Hmm.
able to ascertain massive patterns that really informed the priority of the thing we were designing. So, for example, we knew that in Maria's, at the other Maria's cases, there was a high likelihood sometimes their car broke down, right? Or they were called home because there was something with an aging parent or a child. So we knew, for example, that if we had specific requirements, the ability to quickly transfer a patient, that made at the top of the list in terms of the kinds of requirements that we would do. So a
Hmm.
lot of what informed our practice as designers in the context of Siemens Health Information Systems, was really understanding the frequency of these events in the real lived experiences of Maria and the other Marias of that experience. And so, we would collect all of these as, hey, my mom needed me or my daughter needed me to pick her up. For us, that was a condition that Maria had, a context, a situation. To distill that is that, of course, the system needs to support Maria and the ability to transfer a patient in at any given time, right? And however that is further distilled into proper requirements,
Hmm.
we were sort of the intermediary that actually took Maria's horror situation of a mom being in hospital and needing to pick up a daughter and needing to find somebody else to go visit the patient.
Hmm.
So it is that we are the holders of these emotional conditions in many cases when we talk about the empathy side,
Hmm.
that translates them into something that could be absorbed then by engineering into specific requirements in more clinical language, right? So, and for us, how did we do that? We prioritized the things that we saw in high frequency.
Hmm.
So, it was just extractors of patterns. We maintained the integrity of the moment and the emotion that Maria had in that
Hmm.
specific case, but we were translators of that for implementation, and we prioritize what we call requirements um,
Yeah.
in terms of the frequency that we saw out in the field.
Hmm. No,
Yeah.
it's really interesting, and I love the approach that you took, and thank you for guiding us through the using like the Maria as the example, helping us understand what she or who the type of individual that she represented, and this journey. Critical, I think, reflection on what you've described is that from a designer research point of view, is that we imagine what the journey is for this traveling nurse.
Hmm. Hmm.
Wow. At the same time, yes, Maria is a traveling nurse. She has a specific, patients or people that she's checking up on, caring for, maybe the first time, maybe follow up. Well, we know, depending on where she's traveling, time of day, bus, train, automobile, well, however it might be, that all of there are so many things that can impact her journey to that
Yeah.
person. Well, also she is, like a mother, a daughter, a wife, partner. I mean, so many different things that can interrupt her along the way according to the context in which she's, you know, how she's getting there, where she is, surroundings, public, private space, and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like the journey itself, just for the you know, from point A to point B, we can map and we can say this is the current journey, but the, you know, the future journey, how whatever system, app, experience that we're creating for Maria, where it has values, the where it may, and of course, some biased point of view, where it allows her to still get to where she needs to be by providing, you know, feedback or support based on these edge cases.
Yes,
Or
absolutely.
potential
Yeah, yeah, you've
is much
captured it
more
perfectly.
yeah, it's so interesting. It's like as you think about those the kind of moments in between that are really where we see what do we need to create in order for Maria still to get to point A, B in a way that she feels confident, relaxed, empowered, informed, whatever the attributes
Yeah,
that, or you know, the system that we're creating, whatever that is that needs to help her or be there for her, is it's just so critical.
yeah, control, control.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about the backstage within the ecosystem of that particular Siemens offering, healthcare information informatics, and Siemens Medical. We also are guided by American law.
Mm.
So one of the big ones, and I think we talked about it on the previous podcast or whatever, the whole idea of the Hippocratic Oath. You're dealing as well with people's medical data. So there were a lot of backstage things for us as designers we needed to be trained on. And the
Hmm.
whole idea of what is it called? Anyway, it's HIPAA. It's the Healthcare something Portability Act of I think 1996. I don't recall specifically. We don't have that in Canada. But in the case of people like Maria, while we had to be very mindful of Maria's journey, i.e., captured by the journey map,
Hmm.
there were also backstage things that we needed to be concerned about. That Maria is looking at people's data, right? And the elements of all of the data bits we had about, say, that patient, Maria was never privy to 100% of that data. So maybe Maria is there to change the person's bandages or
Hmm.
to do something very specific, to administer specific medicine. And she accessed the system, but what she see was informed by her access level. So there was, yes, so there was a lot of that too in terms of um areas we saw that Maria felt confined in terms of, well, I cannot see that. You'll have to call blah 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 office to get this other piece of information. So this was really some of the constraints for us, HIPAA,
Hmm.
the Act of 1996, that also informed some of the blockers for Maria, but that was just the law, right? I don't know what the situation is now. So it's really enabling her journey, but
Hmm.
also operating within the confines of the law as it pertains to data privacy of people's healthcare.
Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah.
Thinking of that, that's really thoughtful advice, especially as a you know, practical tips. And what advice would you give to designers or researchers who want to make the insights that they gain actionable? So
Yeah.
how can you make sure a persona, a journey map actually drives design decisions and tells stories that matter?
Yeah, that is a really tricky one. I don't know that I have an answer for this, but I will just talk about my experience using personas that I inherited from a marketing department.
Actually, you know, I can phrase it even differently. I can phrase it differently. So
No,
let me.
I got the question.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay. Got
talking
it.
about informing. So many times as designers, we inherit a persona. At least we're
Hmm.
told it's a persona where it's really a profile. They use a profile that really is informed by demographics. That's completely different. So
Mm.
one of the things that I have done as well too is always to vet a persona. Like I need to find out sort of the origin story of how this persona became into existence. So I think as a new designer, as designers practicing, I think the onus is on you to make sure that you really understand the origin story of the persona, i.e., things like it's is it still valid, right? Maybe somebody created this thing in like 80s or 90s or whenever, but you're practicing in 2025. So the onus on you is to do that, to make sure that it really is used in a very compelling way, the way it was intended, to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that you're able to look at it and feel um, the personas or the people who inform that, the many Marias of the world who inform that. I want to be able to, when I read a persona sheet, and sometimes that is the limitation we have, to feel something if about the people for whom I'm designing, to understand their motives, their concerns, their fears, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think that's why I'm going to just let it, because I think you also have lots of insights about that as well too that you want to add
Yeah,
to
you're
and
just
build
making.
on.
I mean, one thing I've found particularly helpful for a persona, and this is actually I was having a conversation about this yesterday, where one of my peers doesn't like personas for some of the reasons that you've talked about as well, and I've maps. So
Yes,
what I've found with empathy maps is that I will typically look to capture or look to capture I will typically include, what are the person saying and doing. I find helpful for myself, but also helpful for others, to include a quote or that represents the emotion or feeling from
yes,
the voice of the person that I observed or interviewed,
yes,
so that then when they're looking at it or when I'm presenting it as a document or an artifact, that it's obvious, or at least obvious to me, that it's coming from the voice of a person. It's not just me kind of like trying to push this
yeah,
idea of the type of people we're designing for. So
yeah,
that's certainly one thing that I found in it's as part of like part of the practice of creating a persona or an empathy map, is to use that quotation or a formed quote that sort of encompasses the emotion, the feeling, that instead of just like writing paint point or pros and cons, it's written in a way that sort of helps tell the story of that
yes,
person. And that is I guess it's become kind of a habit. I'd say it's part of practice, but almost like a habit of, when I'm creating these artifacts or using these tools, is to look at how do I use them as a way to tell the story, but also what's the
mhm,
language that I can use that represents that, feeling, emotion, but draws then, I haven't framed it this way before, but one way of helping those that are using these, or I want to encourage to use and reflect, to have in an empathetic way.
absolutely love what you've said. And it just reminded me, the last journey map and persona map that I saw was filled with emojis
Mm,
of happy faces up, happy faces down, neutral. And I love what you've said about including actual quotations. I
mm-hmm,
think an emoji face up, smiley face up, relays so little to me. And if I know that the person is saying, "Oh, I freaking hate this," whatever thing, whatever, how intense the emotion is, I'm better able to process that than just a smiley emoji. Like, I don't speak emojis, right? And so I think what you've outlined, the whole idea of like, what are they saying? What are they doing? Also reminds me of our think aloud protocol that we did during usability testing. Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling?
mm-hmm,
You just smirk. Like, why did you smirk? Can you unpack that for me? Right. And so, in much the same, I love what you just said here. It's the whole idea of what are you thinking? What are you thinking and what are you saying? And
mm-hmm.
capturing that in the journey itself as a
Yeah,
quote. Mm-hmm.
yeah. You're, thinking.
That.
Yeah, yeah. So much to unpack with that.
Say best practice we need to bring back. I
Mm-hmm,
was looking at the murals and the murals, some of the newer designers are doing, and I'm just like, this is so gimmicky to me. And this is not really, I don't want to target them and say, oh, well, they're doing it wrong. It's just what they were taught.
mm-hmm,
But it is a way we can bring the best practice of language back into these journey maps.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
excellent observation. And as you're talking about how, because I'm thinking like when the journey maps, and I've done this myself, and certainly within templates that I've shared for people to document a journey,
Yes.
is that you have that, you're excited, getting started. It's like, I'm so excited. That
Yes. Yes.
more, it's like it's that happy or elated And the
Yeah.
emoticon can represent that, of course, as but the it takes me back to a very old date myself. Let's say wise instead takes me to some wise design or sort of checklist of when like the color or how can I phrase this? Color alone is not the only way to represent status. So it's like a color, an icon, and a like a text label. So if I have something that's urgent,
Yeah.
it's like, yes, I can put red, but if I'm color challenged, I may not see
Yeah.
the color. So it's like you also want to have a exclamation mark, like an emoticon or a symbol would be
Yes.
the previous language symbols. Emoticons are symbols, and along with a textual description message. I mean, we can kind of use this as we think of how do we tag things or represent meaning, but within a persona or a journey map, yeah, I love this idea of thinking more about how do we, tag or represent those in a way that conveys more meaning and the emotion and the insights that we're gaining. Of course, at that high level, it's the line of where are we in the journey and how is that person feeling, but extending that to have more detail is, of course, further enhancing the the visual that we're representing, but also, will allow us really to draw people in more as we're telling, as a way of storytelling, I think is
Yes. Yes.
really something that I haven't thought about before, but hey, that's why that's why we're here.
We have this.
Talk through these ideas.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I love that tip. I love that tip.
A discussion. And it is also when we think about divergency and all of that, and also inclusivity, you've just like underscored why, right? You could be colorblind and not realize, that color was red and that color was green. And so, in the same way, when you have a smiley face to be the speak of so many nuanced emotions, that itself is fundamentally flawed, right? And I
Hmm.
know as designers, we love things to look pretty and structured, but it's about really sometimes we need to just get into the belly of the beast, right?
Hmm.
I remember looking at a spreadsheet of comments from a call center, and there were lots of F bombs on there. And things, and I'm just like, I can't put that on the slide, but they're the F bombs, right? And so I want to be able to channel that sentiment and not be reduced to like, oh, the user was, ooh, or the user was, mm.
It's in the the fill in the blanks of the
Yeah,
exclamation star that helps represent the F bomb while at the same time the emoticon further enhancing that as a
yeah,
emotion. So
precisely that.
yeah, so this certainly conversation will lead us into more topics for discussion. And so
I'd love
thanks
to
so
talk
much.
about.
Yeah, so much to talk about. We could easily extend this conversation, but we will at another time. So thanks so much for sharing your insights, Kem. Before we wrap up, are there and I'm actually going to prompt you on this. So thanks. Actually, let me go back. Thanks so much for sharing your insights, Kem. Before we wrap up, there are, I know, many key tips and resources that you can recommend for people who want to deepen their practice in connecting their research to design outcomes. Can you, I know what it is, but can you share what your recent book and some of your
Oh,
previous work that would, help us better understand frameworks, exercises, guiding questions that you feel are a great way for us to learn more?
yeah. So I happen to have my author's copy with me. So the book is Design Heuristics for Emerging Technologies, AI, Data, and Human-Centered Futures.
Hmm.
And we've talked about this before, but I think sadly there's been this massive alienation of the design practice from why we do things. And accordingly, this book in the second part of it really talks about these six categorical heuristic sets, right? And so it's, for example, consent. It's not just consent, but it's nuance. So there are all of these. But the first part of the book, and when we talk about critical design,
Hmm.
really enables us to reconnect the mundane practices that we have to a deeper archaeology and a deeper reason the whys that inform the practice itself. So in my case, I talk about specifically considerations for the rights of women and what are these heuristics that will help elevate women in that digital sphere, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's also important to understand the histories of the commodification of women's bodies, the women's movement, the women's healthcare movement, the reversal of Roe v. Wade. And so that really makes it the first part of the book. And in much that same way, for designers looking to widen the aperture of design practice, it is important to understand the histories and the archaeologies and the context and the ethnographies that inform the work they're doing when they're in the office designing things, so
Mm.
that they do not become alienated from the practice itself, right?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to give us both a challenge. Lead into to be continued. I don't know why I did
Yeah.
this. To be continued conversation. Thanks for watching Design with Renn, where we explore what it means to create with care, context, and intention. If this sparks something for you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's designing for change. Want more? New episodes drop regularly, and you'll find resources, tools, and behind-the-scenes thinking right here on the channel. Keep designing with purpose, and I'll see you in the next one.